In Chronicles this week, we look back when 3 members of the IRA were shot dead in Gibraltar. Paul McCartney was found guilty of growing cannabis, and the BBC tested its viewers' driving skills.
The 6 o'clock news from the BBC with Nicholas Witchell and Andrew Harvey.
Good evening. The headlines at 6 o'clock. The IRA unit shot dead in Gibraltar had not planted a bomb and they were not carrying guns. But the Foreign Secretary has said they were planning a bomb which could have caused hundreds of casualties. A dreadful terrorist act had been prevented, he told MPs.
The Gibraltar governor's residence and the weekly changing of the guard outside it is believed to have been the IRA's intended target. The provisionals fully admit the bodies are of their members on what they term active service, but the story fed by the authorities to journalists yesterday that they were shot after leaving a car containing 500 pounds of explosives in the town centre has since proved to be totally inaccurate. There was no bomb in the car and the IRA members were unarmed. This is what the government says happened. At 1 o'clock lunchtime yesterday, a man drove a Renault car over the border and parked it near the governor's house. At 2:30, the 2 other terrorists crossed the border from Spain. Half an hour later, all 3 met up at the car, where the government says their activities suggested a bomb had been planted. At 3:30, they left the scene and walked towards the border. They were challenged and shot as they neared the airport. A second car was found across the border in Spain, which contained equipment which could have been used for making a bomb. Police are still searching for a 3rd car and explosives. The border between Spain and Gibraltar had been closely watched. The government say that a 4th terrorist was recently followed and was seen to recce the area in front of the governor's residence. Here each Tuesday, the changing of the guard is a popular tourist attraction. If a bomb was planted in this area, the government say casualties could have exceeded 100. That the provisionals were in Spain and even planning a terrorist attack is unique in the history of the IRA. Many details over the past 24 hours are still unclear as to why the official story has changed. Whatever, security forces in Britain and Spain are hailing it as a victory for international cooperation against terrorism.
Spanish police have tonight found the explosives missing after the shooting in Gibraltar of an IRA bomb squad. 5 packets of explosives and a clock which could be used as a bomb timing device were found in a white Ford Fiesta left in an underground car park in the centre of the holiday resort of Marbella. The timer was set for 11:20 in the morning, the time of today's changing of the guard in Gibraltar, which went ahead amidst some of the tightest security seen there. As Peter Gould now reports from Gibraltar, the authorities and the public did not then know whether the terrorist bomb existed or where it was.
Guard! Commanders! Take post!
The army were determined to go ahead with today's ceremony despite the fact that the IRA's bomb had still not been found. Precisely on time, the band of the 1st Battalion, the Royal Anglian Regiment, marched into the square in front of the governor's house for the changing of the guard. They were warmly applauded by a large crowd, which included many tourists. Everyone seemed aware that the police were still looking for one of the bomber's cars and possibly a 4th terrorist. Earlier, the police and army carried out a thorough search of the area, with a number of vehicles being towed away. The 3 terrorists shot dead on Sunday left one of their cars in the street where the bandsmen assembled before the parade. If they felt any nerves today, they weren't showing it. And other soldiers in combat gear maintained a close watch throughout. A dog trained to sniff out explosives was taken along the entire route, checking possible hiding places for an IRA bomb. The ceremony itself passed off without incident, and the band departed playing patriotic music. But Gibraltar may now have to accept a higher level of security.
On Thursday, NASA announced that there are millions of tons of water beneath the moon's surface, making it an ideal launching pad for missions exploring the rest of the solar system. It's nearly 30 years since the moon itself was the big prize in space exploration.
In a few moments, the first pictures, we're in about 2 hours, the first pictures they expect should be coming in from space of Armstrong's space walk. It's been simply a tremendous afternoon here, as I'm sure it's been a great night for you all at home. We've seen something which Aldrin up there on the moon at this moment has invited us to contemplate each in his own way. We've seen this enormous technology of the Americans vindicate itself here this afternoon. We've seen the separation of the command module from the lunar module, like the separation of some primitive cell. And with that separation, the sowing of life, of human life, on our sister planet for the first time. That's a thought which is going to take a long time to digest, and the first words that we heard from space there this afternoon from Aldrin and from Armstrong, Tranquility Base, the Eagle has landed, are words that every schoolboy of the coming generation is probably going to have to learn and pass on to succeeding generations.
I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Surface is fine and powdery. I can pick it up loosely with my toe. It does adhere in fine layers, like powdered charcoal, to the sole and sides of my boot. Go ahead, Mr. President. This is Houston out.
Hello, Neil and Buzz. I'm talking to you by telephone from the Oval Room at the White House. And this certainly has to be the most historic telephone call ever made. I just can't tell you how proud we all are of what you do. For every American, this has to be the proudest day of our lives. And for people all over the world, I am sure they too join with the in recognizing what an immense feat this is. Because of what you have done, the heavens have become a part of man's world. And as you talk to us from the Sea of Tranquility, it inspires us to redouble our efforts to bring peace and tranquility to Earth. For one priceless moment in the whole history of man, all the people on this earth are truly one. One in their pride in what you have done, and one in our prayers that you will return safely to Earth.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's a great honor and privilege for us to be here representing not only the United States, but men of peace of all nations, and with interest and a curiosity and with a vision for the future. Honor for us to be able to participate here today.
And thank you very much, and I look forward, all of us look forward to seeing you on the Hornet on Thursday.
Look forward to that very much, sir.
Liam Gallagher, lead singer of Oasis, appeared in court in Australia charged with assaulting a fan. 25 years ago this week, another pop star, an inspiration to Gallagher, was in court being found guilty of growing cannabis.
As he left the court, McCartney, who'd been given 2 weeks to pay the fine, said, "The judge is a great guy." The judge, Sheriff DJ McDermott, had been told that McCartney had a considerable interest in horticulture and that many of his fans sent him things to grow. The cannabis seeds, it was said, had been received in such a way, and he'd planted them in pots and grown them in the greenhouse at his farm, Hyde Park, about 4 miles from here. The plants, still in pots, were produced in court today. They were found by a local policeman who'd gone to check the empty McCartney farm buildings.
He looked in the greenhouse where tomatoes and cannabis were growing and thought he recognized the cannabis. McCartney's counsel admitted he had knowingly grown the plants but had not known what they were. Indeed, at the time of the offence last September, it took an expert to ascertain they were in fact cannabis. The court was told that McCartney, now aged 30, was a musician and composer, and that he'd bought the isolated farm to find privacy. As he left the court with his wife Linda to speak to reporters, women and young girls waved and shouted to him.
Well, I'm glad to have got off like this, you know. I'm glad it wasn't jail.
Did you think at one point it might have been?
I thought it might be, you know, but I would have been okay as long as I could take my guitar in with me, you know, write a few new songs and stuff, but I wasn't looking forward to it.
It was said in court that you had considerable interest in horticulture. Now, this might surprise some of your friends. When did this start?
A couple of years ago, you know.
And where have you been doing your gardening, etc.?
At the farm, you know, yeah. My dad's a keen gardener, you know. I think it's rubbed off.
It was said that those seeds had been sent to you. How did you come to grow them?
Yeah, well, we got a load of seeds, you know, kind of in the post, and we didn't know what they were, you know. We kind of planted them all, and five of them came up illegal, you know.
The ideal homes of 1908 were traditionally built with bricks and mortar, and they still provide homes for people living in the jet age. The big 4-bedroom houses were built for under £500, a sound investment. Today they cost nearly £7,000. 60 years on, and the diamond jubilee of the exhibition, but the British cling hard to their traditions. The model village is still predominantly bricks and mortar. The really adventurous couple can build a house with plastic bricks during a fortnight's holiday. It's one step up on the children's building set, and a 3-bedroom house can be put together for about £2,000. Mortgages might be difficult, but HP companies will finance the outlay. Even if modern building methods haven't changed all that much in the last 60 years, at least the modern housewife isn't short of gadgets.
This is the liquidizer blender, which will do most of your household chores. This is a particularly good little machine for grinding and liquidizing. Take a warm iron over, and I think you'll agree, ladies, that if you match up your material, you can't see the hole there at all.
The ideal home of 1968 is mock Georgian, cost £15,000. The ideal home of 1908 was mock Tudor, hardly a giant step forward in 60 years.
Finally, back to a pit closure today, a peaceful one, with no protest at all. After 142 years, the Marley Hill Colliery in County Durham closed, its coal exhausted. 330 men are being offered jobs elsewhere, so are 4 pit ponies. The rest go into retirement, as Diane Nelms reports.
The ponies completed the last shift at the pit, which is one of the oldest in the Durham coalfield. 13 finished work here today, 4 of them moving on to other pits in the area, and 9 retiring to local animal rest homes. The miners who've worked with them underground were also moving on today, most of them to other collieries nearby. But the man who's trained the ponies is retiring with them.
I've looked after coalboat ponies for 33 years.
And what about the ones that are retiring and moving on today?
Well, I trained them and I'm going out with them. Finished.
You trained them and you're leaving with them?
With them, yes. When they go to rest homes, I'm going to rest home and all.
The coal board is gradually retiring all its pit ponies and over the next few years hopes to stop using them altogether.
Pet lovers campaigning for reform of the quarantine laws issued a report on Tuesday. It recommended pet passports and microchip implants instead of 6 months confinement for animals arriving in the country. Before the current regulations came in, there was much debate on how to keep rabies out.
Now, here in Britain, there hasn't been a case of rabies outside the quarantine kennels since 1922. The authorities claim that this is because of our 6-month quarantine period. Many pet owners say that this is too severe and that the same safety could be achieved more humanely. Jack Pitsey reports.
If rabies ever gets into this country, the playful snapping of pet dogs like these will suddenly be seen as a lethal menace, likely to spread a disease which is both acutely contagious and terrible. And cats will become objects of even greater horror. A bite from a rabid cat is 4 times more contagious than that from a dog, and any human so bitten is virtually certain to develop rabies, or hydrophobia as the human version is called. To stop that disease from getting into this country, the British authorities put every dog and cat that comes in into quarantine. They've been doing this for over 40 years, and the system has worked. But to the owners of the pets, it means expense, separation, worry about whether their animals are being properly looked after, and at times an envious glance at those who get round the regulations. Perhaps the most conspicuous way around quarantine is the Burton and Taylor method. Keep your dogs on a yacht, never let them set paw on British soil, and no one will object. But if you're not Burton, the only way to bring your pet in without quarantine is to smuggle it. The temptation to smuggle an animal into the country can be very strong. This kitten is not really an illegal immigrant, but cases of people trying to slip their pets past the customs are not unusual by any means. They're part of a trend against the current quarantine laws, in which some people say that the cost of 6 months in quarantine is so high that it virtually forces some pet owners to try and smuggle their pets. And other people say that rabies inoculation would be just as effective as quarantine and a good deal kinder. But to John Kerr, veterinary spokesman of the Ministry of Agriculture, this is still not as effective as the quarantine system.
Well, the proof of the pudding is the thing here. The last case we had in this country outside of quarantine was in 1922. Since that date, we have had 25 cases of rabies in quarantine. It has been quite successful.
And death by rabies is the terror in the background behind this whole argument of quarantine versus vaccine. Quarantine claims to have been 100% effective for 46 years. But then some animals must have been smuggled in that time, and if they haven't brought rabies in, is quarantine really necessary at all? Vaccine claims that it's stamped out human rabies in America and that it's 98% effective. But then could that missing 2% lead to an epidemic of rabies and death?
The agreement, which had taken so long to reach, took no time at all to sign, and Mr. Smith approached the task looking rather serious. The most important of the black leaders, Bishop Muzorewa, arrived in his tribal robes. A big day for the man Mr. Smith once called a political lightweight, and who's now his political equal, on paper at least. Another equal, the Reverend Sitoli, was once put in jail by Mr. Smith for plotting against him. But the past was supposed to be forgotten today, as the 4 men each signed 4 copies of an agreement intended to bring about the end of nearly 80 years of white rule. When the signing was completed, the bishop tried calling for 3 cheers, but there was hardly any response, perhaps because in the midst of the celebrations, everyone's worried about how the rest of the world will react to it all.
Everyone at today's signing is well aware that none of what's happened today means a great deal without the approval of the rest of the world, in particular of Britain and the United States and the so-called frontline presidents from whose countries the guerrillas have been launching their attacks which have kept alive the increasingly damaging war. But Britain's role is perhaps the most important of all, since it's only Britain which can make this agreement legal and therefore acceptable to the rest of the world. There is a growing feeling here that despite Dr. Owen's cautious words so far, Britain is moving towards some form of limited approval of the internal settlement. That, at least, is the hope.
I asked Mr. Smith what would happen if Britain did indeed reject the settlement.
Well, that would be most unfortunate. In some ways, it might even be a disaster.